Imagine this. It is 1956. Buenos Aires, Argentina. A teenage girl meets a handsome German boy at a local cinema. He's charming, confident, and he asks her out. She says yes. They start dating. He takes her home to meet his family. And that's when things get dark, because the man sitting at the dinner table, the one calling himself Ricardo Clement, is not some ordinary factory worker. He is Adolf Eichmann, the man personally responsible for sending millions of Jews to their deaths in Nazi gas chambers, the architect of the Holocaust's final solution. And that teenage girl, she is Jewish, the daughter of a Dachau survivor. This is the story of what happened to the Eichmann family after World War II ended. A story of escape, secrets, loyalty to a monster, a son who betrayed his own ideology, and a family that has never truly escaped the shadow of the man who built the machine of genocide. Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you. The war is over. May 1945. Germany has surrendered. Adolf Eichmann, the man who personally coordinated the deportation of millions of Jews across Europe, the man who sat at the Wannsee Conference and took notes while Nazi leadership calmly planned the systematic murder of an entire people, is now running. He knows what he did. He knows what is coming if the Allies catch him. So he does what every SS officer trained to be efficient and methodical does. He runs with a plan. Eichmann is captured by American forces in 1945. But here is the first twist that changes history. He gives them a fake name. He tells American soldiers he is Otto Eichmann, a low-ranking corporal. Nobody connects him to the name Eichmann yet. The Americans, overwhelmed by hundreds of thousands of prisoners, do not verify every single claim. They don't know who they are holding. Eichmann slips through the cracks of history. He escapes in 1946 and disappears into the German countryside, hiding on isolated farms in the Lüneburg Heath region, working as a laborer, staying off the radar. For 4 years, he lives like a ghost. But the whole time, he is making a plan. He is not going to spend the rest of his life hiding in a German barn. He wants out of Europe entirely. And this is where the true darkness of post-war Germany reveals itself. Because Eichmann is not alone. There is a network, an underground escape route specifically built for fleeing Nazis. It is called the Odessa Network, and through connections within the Catholic Church infrastructure, specifically through an Austrian bishop named Alois Hudel, who believed many Nazis had been unjustly persecuted, Eichmann obtains forged papers. He is given the identity of Ricardo Clement, an ethnic German from South Tyrol. He gets a Red Cross humanitarian passport under this fake name. The Red Cross, overwhelmed with millions of displaced persons across Europe, cannot verify every claim. And so in 1950, Adolf Eichmann, one of the most wanted war criminals on the planet, walks onto a ship in Genoa, Italy, and sails across the Atlantic Ocean to Argentina. He arrives on July 14th, 1950. Argentina, under Juan Perón, has quietly become a haven for former Nazis. Hundreds of SS officers, war criminals, and Nazi collaborators have already found refuge there. The Argentine government is not asking too many questions. Eichmann settles in Buenos Aires and starts a new life. He gets a job. He works at a water company, then later at a Mercedes-Benz factory. He lives in a modest house in a neighborhood called San Fernando on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. He keeps a low profile. He is, on the surface, just another German immigrant working a factory job. But here is what makes this story even more stunning. His family knows where he is. While Eichmann is hiding in Germany from 1945 to 1950, his wife Vera Liebel, whom he married in 1935, files a declaration in Czechoslovakia claiming her husband is dead. A man named Karl Liebe, who is Vera's own brother-in-law, signs a witness statement swearing he saw Eichmann die during the war. A judge in Germany almost officially signs Eichmann's death certificate. This is not an accident. This is the Eichmann family actively working to erase his legal existence so that eventually, when the time is right, Vera can bring the children to Argentina and they can all live together under his fake identity. The deception works. In 1952, Vera Liebel and 3 of the Eichmann sons, Klaus, Horst, and Dieter, sail to Argentina. They reunite with Eichmann in Buenos Aires. The family is together again, living under the name Clement, in a house without running water initially, in one of the less affluent suburbs of Buenos Aires. Think about that for a moment. This man who organized trains that carried millions of people to death camps, who sat at a table and bureaucratically plotted genocide, is now a factory worker living in a small house in Argentina, taking the bus to work, growing tomatoes in his backyard, attending neighborhood barbecues. And one more child is born in Argentina. In 1955, Vera gives birth to a 4th son. They name him Ricardo, the same name as Eichmann's fake identity, Ricardo Clement, as if the fake life they are living has become the real one. This is the world that the Eichmann sons grow up in. A family secret at the center of everything. A father they know is hiding something massive. And 3 of them, Klaus, Horst, and Dieter, grow up as devoted, loyal, proud sons of Adolf Eichmann. But the youngest, Ricardo, will one day shatter everything his brother stood for. And that story comes later. First, we need to talk about the love affair that destroyed everything. The year is 1956. Buenos Aires. Klaus Eichmann is 20 years old, his father's oldest son, already deeply committed to his father's ideology, already proud of the Nazi name, already radicalized by growing up in a household where Adolf Eichmann quietly told his sons that what he had done was not a crime, that the Jews deserved what they got, that it was the Jews who were the real enemies of civilization. According to Eichmann's former girlfriend Carmen Lindemann, who later spoke to the British press about the family, Eichmann once told his sons that Hitler went after the Jews because they planned to sterilize Germans by putting chemicals in the water. This was the propaganda he fed his children. This was the foundation of their worldview. So when Klaus meets a teenage girl at a local Buenos Aires cinema, he is operating from this poisoned reality. The girl's name is Sylvia Hermann. She is 16, pretty, and she does not introduce herself as Jewish. Because in Buenos Aires in the 1950s, being a Jewish refugee's daughter in a neighborhood full of German immigrants is something you keep quiet about. Klaus starts dating Sylvia. He is charming enough, confident German, with a family background he seems strangely proud of. And that pride is where Klaus makes his catastrophic mistake. He tells her, not everything at first, but Klaus Eichmann is not careful. He brags about his father's Nazi service. He makes anti-Semitic comments openly in front of Sylvia and her family. He tells her that his family is special, that his father served the Reich at a high level, that the name Eichmann means something. He seems to think this impresses her. What Klaus does not know, what he cannot know, because he has never asked and cannot imagine, is that Sylvia's father, Lothar Hermann, is a German Jew who survived Dachau concentration camp. He moved to Argentina and has been living quietly, hiding his Jewish identity for safety. He is nearly blind, having lost most of his eyesight from beatings he received at Dachau. When Sylvia brings home a boy named Klaus Eichmann who brags about his Nazi father and makes anti-Semitic remarks at the dinner table, something ignites in Lothar Hermann's memory. He knows that name, Adolf Eichmann. He remembers it. He doesn't confront Klaus. He doesn't make a scene. He waits, and then he begins to investigate quietly. He writes letters. He contacts a Jewish organization in Buenos Aires. He reaches out eventually to a West German prosecutor named Fritz Bauer, who is working on war crimes cases in Hesse, Germany. Bauer is already aware of Eichmann's name from the Nuremberg records. He passes the information to Israeli intelligence. But here is where the story gets even more extraordinary. Lothar Hermann decides to verify the information himself. He cannot see well enough to do it alone. So he sends Sylvia, his own teenage daughter, to the Eichmann family home. He asks her to go under the pretense of visiting Klaus, but to look around, listen, and try to confirm whether the man living there is really Adolf Eichmann. Sylvia goes. She talks to someone at the gate of the Eichmann house, and she meets an older man Klaus accidentally calls his father, not his uncle as the man had introduced himself. She notices details. She reports back to her father. She writes down what she finds. Lothar Hermann sends his notes to Fritz Bauer. He also writes directly to the Israeli government, asking about a reward of $10,000 that was being offered for information leading to Eichmann's capture. The Israelis are initially skeptical. A blind man in Argentina with second-hand information from his teenage daughter? Mossad is doubtful. They sit on the intelligence. But fate is not done with the Eichmann family. In 1960, a separate tip reaches Mossad. A German contact named Gerhard Klammer provides additional confirmation. Now Mossad moves. A team arrives in Buenos Aires. They set up surveillance on a man called Ricardo Clement. They watch him for weeks. A field agent with a camera hidden in a briefcase photographs him from across the street. The photographs are sent to Israel, where analysts compare them to old SS files. The comparison focuses on one detail, the shape of his left ear. It matches. And then, on March 21st, 1960, the surveillance team watches Ricardo Clement come home from work carrying a bouquet of roses. The team realizes something. March 21st is Adolf and Vera Eichmann's wedding anniversary. A man who truly is Ricardo Clement would have no reason to bring flowers home on this date, but an Adolf Eichmann hiding under a fake name, celebrating 25 years of marriage with his wife, absolutely would. That bouquet of roses confirmed his identity. 6 weeks later, on May 11th, 1960, as Eichmann steps off a bus near his home after his shift at the Mercedes factory, a team of Mossad agents grabs him from behind, throws him into a car, and drives away at speed. He is gone. Just like that. The man who had evaded justice for 15 years. The man who sent millions to die. Taken in under 60 seconds. The Eichmann family is left standing in Buenos Aires with no idea where he went, whether he was dead or alive, or what comes next. And Klaus, the son who's stupid, arrogant bragging to a Jewish girl he wanted to impress, had set off the chain of events that led directly to his father's capture. Klaus would spend the rest of his life consumed by rage, denial, and a Nazi ideology that destroyed everything it touched. Adolf Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem begins on April 11th, 1961. It is the most watched criminal trial in history up to that point. Broadcast on television globally, more than 100 Holocaust survivors take the stand and testify in public for the first time about what they saw, what was done to them, what happened to their families in the camps. For many people around the world, it is the first time they truly understand the Holocaust, not as statistics, but as human stories told by human beings who survived. For the Eichmann family in Buenos Aires, it is something else entirely. Klaus, the eldest son, does not watch the trial in silence. He does not disappear. He fights back. Within hours of his father being sentenced to death in December 1961, Klaus organizes a press conference in Buenos Aires. He stands in front of journalists and declares that his father is innocent, that the charges against him are propaganda, that the trial is a Jewish conspiracy. All these things they are accusing my father of are pure propaganda, Klaus tells reporters. These war crimes are not true. I have heard that top Jews themselves ordered these executions because they believe Jews should be martyrs. He says this in 1961, on camera, in front of the world. He then travels to the United States, where he gives an interview to Parade magazine repeating the same denials. The U.S. government, according to CIA documents later declassified, monitors his visit with concern. He is eventually deported back to Argentina. Meanwhile, Horst, the second son, reacts even more violently. Carmen Lindemann, who would later spend 13 years as Horst's partner, tells the press that when Eichmann was taken by Mossad, Horst immediately hung a swastika on the family house. Not quietly, not privately. He put it where anyone walking past could see it. When their father is executed on June 1st, 1962, hanged at a prison in Ramla, his body cremated, his ashes scattered in the Mediterranean Sea so that no grave could ever be made of him, so that no memorial could ever honor him, the Eichmann sons explode. Carmen recalls, when he was executed, Klaus and Horst became very angry and started attacking Jews. That made things even worse for them. Think about that. The response of these men to their father's execution for organizing the murder of 6 million people is to go out and attack Jewish people in Buenos Aires. The cycle of violence that their father built is still running through them, a living infection of ideology. Dieter, the third son, is quieter about it. He never gives interviews. He becomes a construction manager, dividing his time between Argentina and Germany for years. But according to those who know him, he too believes his father was innocent. He holds the same ideology. He is just better at hiding it. The Eichmann sons marry, have children. Klaus marries a woman of African descent in 1959, an irony that is almost too dark to fully process, given his father's fanatical white supremacist ideology. They have 2 children. Klaus later abandons her and moves to southern Germany, where he has 3 more children with another woman. He eventually develops Alzheimer's disease and dies in 2015 at the age of 79, having never once publicly admitted his father's guilt. Horst stays in Argentina. He and Carmen never legally marry, but they are together for 13 years. Horst remains, by Carmen's description, a devout Nazi until the end of his life. He dies in December 2015 of bowel cancer at the age of 75. He dies still believing his father did nothing wrong. Dieter is the last surviving older brother. As of recent reports, he lives in a Buenos Aires apartment a few kilometers from the exact spot where Mossad agents abducted his father. He is in his late 70s. He has a wife named Martha Valinati. He owns several rental properties. He has never spoken to the press. He still lives in the shadow of his father's name, the name that defines everything about his life. And from what little has been reported about him, he has made peace with that shadow by refusing to admit what cast it. These 3 men, Klaus, Horst, Dieter, grew up sitting across the dinner table from a mass murderer who told them bedtime stories about Jewish plots. They were raised on poison, and they carried that poison until they died or until the present day. But the 4th son, Ricardo, is an entirely different story, and this is the twist that makes this entire family saga something almost unbearable to fully comprehend. Ricardo Eichmann is born in Buenos Aires in 1955. He is 5 years old when Mossad agents pull his father off a bus and disappear him into the night. He barely knows the man. He grows up with a memory of chaos, of a mother shattered by fear, of older brothers who rage and grieve and become harder and angrier every year. But Ricardo grows up differently. As a teenager, he does what his brothers never do. He goes to the library. He finds books. He reads about what his father actually did, not the version his brothers tell him. The propaganda, the conspiracy theories, the denials. He reads the historical record. He reads the testimonies of survivors. He reads what happened inside the camps where Adolf Eichmann sent his train schedules and deportation orders. And Ricardo Eichmann reaches a conclusion that breaks everything open. His father was guilty. Not just technically guilty. Not just legally guilty. He was morally responsible for one of the greatest acts of evil in human history. And the execution was justified. Ricardo says this publicly, not screaming into a microphone. Quietly, deliberately. He says his father's death sentence was the correct outcome of a just trial. He then goes further. He leaves Argentina. He goes to Germany. He studies. He becomes an archaeologist. a man who spends his professional life preserving history and understanding the past. He works for the German Archaeological Institute. He becomes a professor of Near Eastern archaeology at the University of Tübingen. He publishes academic papers. He digs in the earth and recovers what was buried. It is almost poetic. This son of the man who wanted to erase millions of people from history, spending his life preserving the traces of human civilization. In 1995, Ricardo Eichmann does something almost impossible to imagine. He meets V.A. Haroni. Haroni is the Mossad agent who was primarily responsible for identifying and capturing his father in Argentina in 1960. The man who took his father, and Ricardo meets him. They talk. Ricardo declines most press requests about this meeting. He keeps his private life private, but the fact that he chose to sit across from the man who captured Adolf Eichmann, and that both of them apparently managed to have a human conversation, says everything about how far Ricardo has traveled from the world his brothers never left. Ricardo has 2 sons of his own. He is, by all accounts, a quiet, serious, private man who carries an impossible last name with as much dignity as the situation allows. Now let's talk about Vera. Vera Liebel was born in 1909. She married Adolf Eichmann in 1935. She filed a false death declaration to protect him. She sailed to Argentina with their 3 sons to rebuild a life under a stolen identity. She gave birth to their youngest child in a country she had chosen to become a fugitive in. When Eichmann was taken in 1960, Vera was left in Buenos Aires with 4 sons and a husband in Israeli custody. She flew to Israel in April 1962. Shortly before his execution, she saw him one last time. She wrote a letter to Israeli President Ben-Zvi begging for clemency. Ben-Zvi rejected it. On June 1st, 1962, her husband was hanged, his ashes scattered at sea. No body, no grave, no place to mourn. Vera Eichmann lived until 1997. She outlived her husband by 35 years. She never remarried. She never gave a significant public interview. She lived quietly in Argentina, then reportedly in Germany later in life, surrounded by the sons who had become the fractured aftermath of a monster's family. She saw Klaus die in denial. She saw Horst die in denial. She saw Dieter remain in silence. And somewhere in the distance of her later years, she knew that her youngest son had repudiated everything she had helped build. Every lie she had protected, every border she had crossed, every false name she had answered to. She died at 88. The world barely noticed. There's one final dark detail to this story that ties everything together. The neighborhood in Buenos Aires where the Eichmann family once lived. The modest house in San Fernando where Adolf Eichmann grew tomatoes, where Klaus grew into a Nazi, where a 5-year-old Ricardo played in the yard, not knowing what his father was. That neighborhood still exists. The house is still there. And for decades, Dieter Eichmann lived just a few kilometers away from it, from the spot where his father was grabbed, from the ghost of everything that family was. He never left. Think about that. The son of one of history's most wanted war criminals, choosing to spend his entire retirement in the same city where his father was captured. Not running, not hiding, just staying in the shadow of the name, in the city that gave the whole story up. Some people inherit wealth. Some inherit debt. The Eichmann sons inherited the name of the man who put 6 million people on trains to death camps. 3 of them spent their lives defending it. One of them had the extraordinary moral courage to reject it. And Adolf Eichmann himself, the bureaucrat who organized genocide with the efficiency of a shipping manager, the man Hannah Arendt described as the embodiment of the banality of evil. A man not driven by psychopathic bloodlust, but by ambition, ideology, and a willingness to follow orders without letting conscience intervene. Rests nowhere. No grave. No earth. Just the sea. And the story of what he left behind. A wife who lied to protect him. sons who were broken by him in different directions, and a family that became a case study in how evil metastasizes through generations, unless someone somewhere is brave enough to read a library book and tell the truth. That is the story of the Eichmann family. Not just the capture, not just the trial, but what happened after, to the woman, to the sons, to the ideology that was passed down like a family heirloom, and to the one child who refused to inherit it. History doesn't end with the villain's death. It continues through the people left behind, through the choices they make when the cameras are gone and the verdict has been read and the ashes are at sea. Klaus chose rage and denial until the day he got Alzheimer's and forgot everything, including perhaps what he was defending. Horst hung a swastika on the house. Dieter stayed quiet and stayed close. And Ricardo became an archaeologist, a man who digs up the past and preserves it, because some pasts must never be forgotten. If you found the story powerful, it's because it is. This is not just history. This is about what we pass on, what our parents teach us, what we choose to believe, and at what point a human being decides to look at the evidence and tell the truth, even when the truth is the worst possible thing about the person they came from. That's everything. Thank you for watching.